Caitlin Clark just forced the WNBA to change. Not gradually, not quietly, completely. For 2 years, people said the hype was too much. The complaints were exaggerated, the attention would fade. But this week, the league said her name differently. The commissioner called her the biggest star. No debate, no qualifiers. And behind the scenes, new rules just put real pressure on the very system that failed her. That's not a coincidence. That's the impact. This is the moment everything flipped. And after this, there was no going back. When ignoring Caitlin Clark stopped being an option and started becoming a liability. Caitlin Clark versus the narrative. The turning point to understand why Cathy Engelbert's Pat McAfee comments hit so hard. You need to rewind the tape back to where this whole thing started publicly. And I mean the moment that set the tone for everything that came after. It was the 60 Minutes interview, one of the most watched news programs in America, averaging somewhere around 7 to 8 million viewers on any given Sunday night. Cathy Engelbert had a massive platform sitting right in front of her, the kind of platform most sports commissioners would kill for, and the timing could not have been more perfect. Caitlin Clark had just come off a college career at Iowa that did not just break viewership records for women's basketball, it obliterated them.
Clark, guarded by Robinson. Clark firing again. Oh my! Caitlin Clark, a showstopper!
The 2024 NCAA Women's Tournament Final between Iowa and South Carolina pulled in 18.7 million viewers. Let that number sink in. That is more than the NBA Finals averaged that same year. That is more than most NFL playoff games outside of the conference championships. A women's college basketball game outdrew the NBA Finals, and the person at the center of that moment was about to walk into the WNBA. Fans who had never in their lives watched a single WNBA game were suddenly buying tickets specifically to see her play. Arenas that had been half empty for a decade, buildings where franchises were practically giving away seats on weeknight games, were now turning people away at the door. Indiana Fever season ticket sales exploded. Road games sold out weeks in advance.
Iowa's Caitlin Clark has become a national phenom, and some fans say they went the extra mile just to watch her play here.
This was not a gradual uptick in interest. This was a tidal wave, and everyone in the sports world could see exactly where it was coming from. So Engelbert sits down on 60 Minutes with all of that momentum behind her, with the entire country watching, and what does she do with that moment? She looks into the camera and says, "No league is ever about one player. That player could get hurt or whatever. Or whatever. I need you to sit with that for a second. Your league's most watched player, the person responsible for a once-in-a-generation surge in attention, revenue, and cultural relevance. The woman who just made women's basketball the biggest story in American sports."
We'll get back to that here. Caitlin Clark, you know when she goes left, watch out. That's where she is.
Jones can't hit the quick jumper.
And you casually toss out or whatever about the possibility of her getting injured. Like you are talking about a shipping delay on a quarterly earnings call. That phrase stuck, and it stuck because it revealed something that felt unmistakable to every fan watching. This was not a commissioner celebrating her league's biggest asset. This was a CEO managing a corporate liability. And once you see it through that lens, everything Engelbert did over the next 2 years makes perfect sense. Because here's the thing. Cathy Engelbert did not come up through basketball. She did not play. She did not coach. She did not work her way through a front office or a scouting department. She came from Deloitte, one of the largest professional services firms on the planet, where she served as CEO and became the first woman to ever hold that title in the company's history. That is genuinely impressive in the corporate world. But it also means her instincts are boardroom instincts, not locker room instincts. And the first rule of corporate risk management is this: do not let any single asset become so important to your brand that the asset gains leverage over you. Spread the narrative, distribute the credit, make sure no one person can hold your organization hostage. That thinking works beautifully when you are managing a $60 billion consulting firm. It does not work when the asset you are trying to downplay is the reason your arenas went from half empty to standing room only in a single offseason. But Engelbert tried it anyway. She tried to frame the WNBA's growth as a collective achievement, a product of rivalries and compelling content, and the natural evolution of the sport. And look, she was not entirely wrong that other factors played a role. Angel Reese brought real attention. The league's overall product was improving, but every single time Engelbert pushed that collective framing, the actual data pushed back harder. Viewership did not spike evenly across the schedule. It spiked specifically on Clark's games.
Caitlin Clark on a mission.
The most Caitlin Clark way to get a bucket. I mean, we are talking well inside the middle of the MediaCom logo.
Attendance did not rise across every arena equally. It spiked specifically when Indiana came to town. Sponsors were not calling the WNBA league office because they suddenly fell in love with women's basketball as a concept. They were calling because of one player who made the brand impossible to ignore. Engelbert could say whatever she wanted on 60 Minutes, on CNBC, on any platform they put a microphone in front of her. The spreadsheets in her own office were telling a completely different story. When the whistle stopped, now here is where this story goes from frustrating to genuinely infuriating. And I want you to really stay with me here, because this is the part that made a lot of fans lose their trust in the league entirely. While Kathy Engelbert was busy managing Clark's image on cable news, something very real and very ugly was happening on the court. Caitlin Clark was getting hit. Not the normal physicality of professional basketball. Not the kind of bumps and shoves that every player deals with when they step between the lines. This was different. Hard contact, flagrant level contact, the kind of stuff that in any other league, on any other player, would have drawn immediate whistles and probably post-game fines. And the refs, they just stood there, game after game after game, the same pattern, and no one in a striped shirt seemed to care. Let me give you the clearest example. Playoff game, 2024, Indiana versus the Connecticut Sun.
Indiana fighting for its season. Connecticut looking to close things out tonight, and here we go.
Clark takes a hit square in the eye from Dijanai Carrington. Not incidental contact, not a basketball play, a direct shot to the face. Clark is visibly dazed, and the officials decided that was not worth a whistle. The league's biggest draw just got hit in the face during a playoff game. Heron, nothing happened. Fever head coach Stephanie White did not just complain about this behind closed doors. She started documenting it publicly. She cited a -31 free throw discrepancy in certain series. And that is not a number you can wave away with, well, sometimes officiating events out. When your head coach is going to the press with specific statistics about foul differentials, that is not frustration after a bad game. That is a coach building a legal record. And she was not the only one paying attention. The WNBA Players Association was tracking every single one of those numbers too. So when Engelbert got pressed about the officiating pattern, what did she say? Referees are human. That was her answer. Referees are human. And sure, you can say that when a ref misses a bang-bang call in a fast game. Every fan understands that. But you do not say referees are human when a coach is handing you documented free throw differentials and your most marketable player is getting hit in the face on national television without a foul being called. That is not an explanation. That is a deflection, and it stopped working the moment the numbers got too big to hide behind corporate language. Meanwhile, Engelbert went on CNBC's Power Lunch and did something that made a lot of people's blood boil. When the anchor pressed her directly about the flagrant foul situation, her answer had nothing to do with player safety. Instead, she compared Clark and Angel Reese to Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, said rivalries are what make people watch, and told the audience there is no more apathy. Everybody cares. Now, Bird and Magic is a loaded comparison. Aaron Engelbert grabbed it because it sounds exciting, and exciting was the frame she wanted. But Bird and Magic were two elite players competing at the highest level for years. It was not one player getting hammered with hard fouls while referees stood there.
State with a foul on Sonato as she went up for the final shot. Clark goes down near midcourt.
It was not fans directing personal attacks at either of them in arenas. Engelbert used that comparison because it let her turn a player safety question into a marketing pitch. She took a legitimate concern about her league's officiating and repackaged it as proof that the product was compelling. The commercial upside went into the league's column, the governance problems got deflected, and Clark just kept showing up every single game, kept filling buildings, kept being exactly the player everyone came to watch, despite the contact and the no calls. 62 records, 1 phone call, sworn 0 respect. If you want one image that captures everything wrong with how the WNBA handled Caitlin Clark in her first 2 seasons, it is the Rookie of the Year award. When Clark won Rookie of the Year in 2024, Commissioner Engelbert delivered the award over a phone call on speakerphone. While the Fever were in Connecticut, there is actual video of this, and honestly, it is hard to watch. No ceremony, no appearance, no real moment of recognition for the player who had just single-handedly dragged just a speakerphone and a quick congratulations. Now fast forward to 2025.
Congratulations, Caitlin. You are the 2024 Kia WNBA Rookie of...
When Paige Bueckers won Rookie of the Year, Engelbert flew in, showed up in person, turned it into an actual event, which is exactly what that award should always be. 2 players, same award. It's completely different treatment from the same commissioner who had just spent a year telling national television that the league was not about any one player. But optics matter, especially when you are the commissioner of a league that millions of fans are now watching specifically because of the player you just honored over speakerphone. The message that's sent, whether intentional or not, was unmistakable. Clark's contribution was being managed, not celebrated. It was being kept in a box so it would not get too big, so it would not give Clark or her fans or her market leverage over the league's official narrative. And that is what makes this whole story so fascinating. Because while Engelbert was busy treating Clark like a corporate variable she could publicly minimize, Clark was building something that would eventually make that entire approach collapse on itself. Think about what Clark did in her rookie season alone. She set the all-time single-season assist record with 337. She broke the rookie three-pointer record with 122. She dragged the Indiana Fever back to the playoffs for the first time since 2016. She broke 62 records along the way. 62, and she did all of it while getting hit harder than almost any other player in the league with fewer free throws to show for it. Every game she played in, home or away, the building was packed. Road teams were reporting their highest attendance figures in years, specifically on nights when Indiana came to town. The Chicago Sky, New York, Seattle, Phoenix, teams that had been struggling to fill seats were suddenly turning people away at the door. And the only thing that changed on their schedule was that Caitlin Clark was now on it. I want you to really think about what that means because it is easy to gloss over it. This is not just a star player selling out her own arena. Every franchise in the league was selling more tickets, more concessions, more merchandise on nights Clark showed up. People were flying across the country to watch her play. There were fans from Newfoundland, Canada, showing up in central Indiana just to see a regular season game.
Fans came from thousands of miles just to see her.
When has that ever happened in the WNBA? When has any single player in this league turned opposing arenas into destination events? That had never happened before. Matra and everyone in every front office knew exactly why it was happening now. So the revenue argument for Clark was never really just about Indiana. It was about every single franchise in the league collecting more money on nights they hosted her. That is a completely different kind of financial reality than she is good for the Fever. That is a league-wide economic engine wearing a number 22 jersey. And when you understand that, you understand why the CBA ended up looking the way it did. CBA 2026. The agreement Clark made inevitable. This is where the story shifts from frustration to something that actually feels like progress. And honestly, it's about damn time. Because the new collective bargaining agreement that just got ratified isn't just about bigger paychecks. It's a structural overhaul, a game changer. And the reforms tied to officiating, the ones that directly address all the hard contact controversies and ignored calls we saw, are not optional language or PR talk. They are written into a contract that now governs how this league operates from the inside out. Here's what makes this so significant, especially after 2 seasons of fans watching what happened to Caitlin Clark on the court. The CBA mandates real transparency and accountability in officiating. And that's not a small footnote. That's a fundamental shift. Under the new agreement, the league and the WNBA Players Association are required to hold 3 formal officiating review meetings each season, specifically focused on flagrant fouls, technicals, and patterns of no calls. At each of these sessions, the officials' decision-making will be reviewed in a way that was never possible before. This is not lip service. The meetings are written into the legal language of the collective bargaining agreement itself.
President of the WNBA Players Association, she negotiated a new collective bargaining agreement.
But even more important than meetings is this. The union now gets access to the same points of emphasis videos that are used to train and instruct referees. Before this CBA, those videos, the internal instructional materials that define what level of contact is acceptable and what is not, were entirely behind closed doors. Players, coaches, and fans had zero visibility into what referees were being told, meaning if a borderline call wasn't made, teams had no reliable way to know whether it was a genuine human miss or a league directive to let contact go. That ambiguity was maddening and contributed to the growing distrust many viewers felt. Now, the union sees the same materials officials see. So if educational points of emphasis clearly state that certain head and face contact should be whistled every time, and refs still choose not to call it, the union can point to a paper trail. There is now a formal structure built to surface patterns, not bury them. Referees who consistently miss calls will be operating in a framework that highlights those failures, and that by design makes accountability possible in a way it never has been. And make no mistake, the WNBPA did not get here by accident. They built a case. They turned documented officiating failures and viral on-court incidents into negotiating leverage. That includes coaches citing statistical foul differentials and national audiences seeing the same questionable no calls play out repeatedly. Those weren't just talking points. They became facts on paper that could be used at the bargaining table. When you walk in with specific statistics, clear examples, and documented patterns, the other side can't coast on corporate deflection anymore. Terry Carmichael Jackson, the WNBPA's executive director, made it clear after weeks of tense negotiation that the union wouldn't accept vague language about rivalry, excitement, or human referees as a substitute for real protections. And they didn't, because what's now in the contract reflects that demand for measurable, enforceable process. But officiating isn't the only historic part of this deal. The 2026 CBA also includes a dramatic salary restructure backed by an entirely new revenue-sharing model. The first of its kind in women's professional sports, the salary cap jumps from $1.5 million in 2025 to $7 million in 2026, with average salaries projected around $583,000 and minimums above $300,000. Top players will now have the opportunity to make multi-million-dollar contracts, something unheard of in league history.
The basketball superstar is about to sign a Nike endorsement deal worth $28 million.
Ooh. Rookie contracts will be significantly higher too, and bonuses for individual awards and playoff success have all been beefed up. None of this happens without the league generating a vastly different revenue profile than it had in 2023. Attendance, broadcast deals, and sponsorships all spiked, and that financial reality gave the players real leverage. It's not hyperbole to say this agreement reflects the economic footprint players have created, not corporate tolerance for their presence. In short, this CBA is not just a document that raises pay. It's a foundation for accountability, stability, and long-term growth. And the reforms inside it are a direct response to 2 seasons of fans demanding something better. This is what structural change looks like when an entire league can no longer ignore both the numbers and the people who generated them. The 180 that changed everything. So let us talk about the moment that brought this whole thing full circle. Kathy Engelbert sat down on the Pat McAfee show, and she called Caitlin Clark the biggest star in the league. Not one of the biggest, not a major contributor, not rivalries are what drive the sport, the biggest star. That is a complete, total, undeniable reversal from the woman who sat on 60 Minutes 2 seasons ago and said or whatever about Clark getting hurt. Nothing about Clark's talent changed between those 2 statements. Nothing about her marketability changed either. Clark was pulling in the same crowds, breaking the same records, driving the same sponsor calls the entire time Engelbert was on television explaining why no league is about one player. What changed is that the CBA got signed, the revenue numbers got locked in, and Engelbert no longer had any room to keep treating Clark as a variable she could publicly downplay, the Pat McAfee audience is also worth thinking about for a second. Must because that is not a WNBA crowd. That is a broad sports audience. A lot of it skeptical of women's basketball. A lot of it exactly the demographic the league needs to keep growing. And Engelbert walked onto that show and said Clark is the biggest star in the league. That is not a slip. That is a deliberate repositioning, and the timing, right after the CBA announcement, is absolutely not an accident. She said Clark has been a huge part of the growth of the league, called her an incredible player and a great ambassador for the game.
And Clark who put the three up and in. The second three of the game.
And said she could not be prouder of how Clark is handling the moment. She even mentioned Clark doing crossover work with the NBA on NBC, which tells you Engelbert is now actively promoting Clark's brand reach instead of trying to contain it. That is a 180-degree shift in posture, and it happened in the span of 2 seasons. Remember, this is the same commissioner who gave Clark the speakerphone Rookie of the Year, the same one who pivoted every player safety question into a marketing pitch about rivalries, the same one who said referees are human when presented with documented evidence of officiating failures. Now she is on Pat McAfee sounding like Clark's biggest fan, and the reason is simple. The CBA locked in a financial structure where Clark's value is now a number on a spreadsheet that Engelbert has to defend to owners, broadcast partners, and expansion franchises that paid real money to enter this league. You cannot collect that money and then go on television and minimize the person who generated it. The math stopped allowing it, and I think that is the part of this story that people need to understand most clearly. This was never about Engelbert having a change of heart. She is not sitting at home watching Clark highlights and tearing up.
Watch that inside hand, that left hand. Caitlin Clark.
This is about leverage. When the money was still coming in and the CBA had not been signed, Engelbert had the room to manage the narrative however she wanted. But once those numbers became contractually binding, once expansion teams had written checks and broadcast partners had signed deals built on Clark's viewership numbers, the narrative had to match the reality. Because the owners read those spreadsheets, the broadcast partners read those spreadsheets. And if the commissioner is out there publicly minimizing the person responsible for the numbers on those spreadsheets, that is a problem that costs money. So Engelbert adjusted, not because she wanted to, because she had to. This wasn't just a season, it was a shift in power, written into contracts, enforced in real time, and impossible to walk back. The league looks different now. The money is different. The rules are different. And whether anyone wants to admit it or not, the center of gravity has already moved. But here's the part nobody's saying out loud. When one player can reshape the system this much, what happens next? Because leagues don't just absorb change like this, they react to it. So the real question isn't what just happened, it's this. Now that the structure has changed, who's actually in control of what comes next?